Ukrainian forces continue their campaign to roll back Russia's so-called Pokrovsk offensive. Is this bad news for a failing Russian military, or is it just Ukraine setting its priorities? Plus, we're going to talk about the Gaza ceasefire deal falling apart before our eyes, the president's frantic attempts to save it, and of course, Russia's plans for its new world order. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so this I thought was one of the more interesting stories is that in the last 24 hours, we've seen Ukrainian forces also push back and occupy parts of Pishchane. And this is notable because it is a stepping stone, one of the final stepping stones on the way to Pokrovsk. And this reflects the fact that it appears that Ukrainian armed forces feel they've exhausted Russia's Pokrovsk offensive to a sufficient degree that they can begin to drive it back. Now, we've talked about the fact that yesterday that the Ukrainians are trying to actually conduct some sort of pincer-type maneuver, pushing near Uspadivka, Salona, and Prishchane in order to cut off these Russian forces that form kind of the apex of this Pokrovsk southern pincer. And I think this reflects, again, Ukraine's decision that they say, hey, we aren't going to give up Pokrovsk without a fight. We're going to try to keep the fight going. But it is a long way from victory. And, you know, it's worth noting again that Russia is also making advances, right? You can see Ukrainian armed forces conducting this withdrawal around Andriivka. They should be conducting withdrawal near Dachne. But you also have, of course, Russian forces rolling back some Ukrainian gains outside of Sudza, right? You can see here where Russian forces, again, having effectively crossed this river, are driving Ukrainian forces back from Kursk. So this isn't to say, I don't think this is an indicator that the Russian armed forces are in some kind of total disarray, but I think it does reflect the fact that there is a slowing of offensive operations. I think Ukraine wants to keep the pressure on Russia, and I think fighting to keep Pokrovsk open is really, really essential. Now, before we talk about Russia's so-called New World Order plans, I want to mention that today is Tuesday, and that means that we have dropped one new video on combatvetnews.com. This is my site. If you want to support the channel, keep me independent. This functions exactly like Patreon. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I do a breakdown of the latest footage from the front lines. This can include footage sent to me by units that are currently fighting. We get access to their telegrams, some of their private telegrams, and some of their Signal. Some of them just send me on videos on Signal, and I share them with you if I'm allowed to. And this is the largest uncensored archive of combat footage, at least that I know of, with videos dating back all the way to the start of the war. So if you want to keep me independent, support the channel, and get access to uncensored combat videos, combatvetnews.com is the place. Okay, so I want to talk also about this unusual story here. According to some leaked documents, Russia has been talking about trying to establish a new world order, right? This is among the highest echelons of their ruling class. Their goal, of course, is to counter the so-called Western blocs. This is the EU, Japan, United States, right? All of these countries that are defined by their free markets and their electoral democratic systems. And Russia is really mad that this is the case, right? Why? Because at the end of the day, Putin and his oligarchs are unwilling to cede their political control of the Russian state, and so they'll never be able to become a full member of a bloc like the EU. And the more prosperous every country that joins the EU gets, right? Look no further than Poland, right? Developing a Western orientation in the early 2000s, and in turn experiencing an absolutely rocket ship level of economic growth and development, right? And imagine if you're a country like Tajikistan, who's, linked your horse, so to speak, to the Russian economic system, and you've continued to be mired in unbelievable poverty, right? Now, what's interesting is that this was a strategy session with figures including dozens of government officials and top executives at Russia's state companies, as well as Kremlin hardliners like the so-called philosopher, Putin's personal philosopher, Alexander Dugin. This is the architect of kind of the Ruski Mir, new Russian world order perspective. Really interesting that he's still around. He actually, you might recall, survived an assassination attempt that I think killed his adult daughter. But anyway, really a who's who of questionable shitbags in the Russian world. Now, what they are looking to create is a Moscow-led, trade-oriented, what they call a Eurasian macro region. And this, of course, echoes Dugin's thinking on the Eurasian civilization, in which he argues is unique and never going to be Russia's never going to be a European country. They've always been and always will be a Eurasian global power, right? And they argue that this Eurasian region could restore its global influence, right, by connecting with the global south, providing and receiving raw materials, and developing financial and transportation ties. But what's key, just like the Western Bloc, there is a worldview component of this and an ideological element, right, where they have their own sanctions policy and a worldview in which they write the rules, which is usually a wink and a nod to telling other autocratic leaders around the world that, you know, when you partner with the EU or the United States, we do this pesky thing where we ask you to hold free elections and improve the freedom of speech or freedom of the press in your country. And Russia's saying, in our world, we're not going to do that, right? This bloc, per the Kremlin's vision, of course, would one day counter other economic blocs like the US, the EU, and Moscow, and even their own ally, China, right? That's a pretty tall ambition. And the reason I point this out is because there's some real hurdles here, right? Not the least of which is getting out of Ukraine, because the entire Russian military and economy is oriented to winning a regional war in eastern Ukraine. They're not going to have time to build a mega super ultra bloc, but, right, the presentation acknowledged that Moscow is dwindling influence even among its current allies, that there are systemic problems in the Eurasian Economic Union, which is, of course, Belarus, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and, of course, a strong preference by each of them for the Western payment systems, while Russia's banking access is limited, right? And I want to point out that the economy of these countries, like Belarus, right? Let's see if we can find Belarus GDP growth over time. When you look at this sort of thing, let's take a look. Here's old Belarus's 10-year GDP growth curve. As you can see, it spends huge portions of its of the last 10 years in total economic collapse. For context, guys, during the U.S. Great Recession, we saw less than 1% decline in GDP. Here, we see multiple years in which Belarusian GDP turns negative, very negative. In fact, it only spends a few years in economic growth. This is what countries look forward to if they enter the Russian economic zone. The Russian economic zone is just not like, it's not like other countries. I don't know what else to tell you, right? And we can contrast this by, for example, Poland's GDP growth over the same period. Again, an Eastern European country. Let's see if we can find it here. Here we go. We'll give you a 10-year. This is Poland. And you can see here that the GDP growth curve remaining 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, there you go. 2020 COVID. It had a 2% drop. So this wouldn't even put it, this absolutely catastrophic geopolitical event for this country of Poland wouldn't even be in the top probably 4 worst quarters of GDP growth for Belarus, right? And then it's back 7%, rocketing back 5% and 0.16%, right? So I point this out because what you have to understand is that this is what every country looks at. And at the end of the day, countries where everybody's getting a little richer, they don't have a problem with they don't worry about revolutions the way a country like Russia might, right? That doesn't mean they don't have revolutions. It just means that it's way harder to do when you have a country where lots of people are experiencing economic increase. And so this is what this is the fundamental problem for Russia's new world order, is that countries don't want to be a part of this. That's it, right? And here, let me show you guys. See if you can join me in this game of Clue. Pretend you are a small Eastern European country or a Caucasus country, and you get a knock on the door, and it's the United States saying, "Hey, would you like to be a part of a trade bloc where, yeah, your autocrats are going to lose some of their political power. They may even not hold these elite power positions, and you're going to have to do things that you may really dislike. For example, having a free press that might criticize you. But in exchange, you will get access on some level to these large markets, the United States, UK, France, Germany. I mean, look at this. All of these people you could sell your national products to. I mean, look at that. And they'll pay American prices. They'll pay Italian prices. They'll pay German prices. I mean, look at the size of this. And then you have another knock on your door, and it's China. And China says, guys, would you be willing to, and by the way, guys, all these European countries, sure. But you also have in the U.S. sphere of influence, places like Japan, Taiwan, right? You see how big these economies are. And then you get another knock, and it's Russia. What does Russia offer you? Well, as you could see here, can you see Russia? Are they even present in here? There's Mexico. And yeah, I don't even see poor Russia. Are they rest of Europe? No. Here it is. 1.65 trillion. There's Russia. There's the Russia. There's the leader of the Eurasian Economic Zone. And as you may notice that there's really no Caucasus countries elsewhere in here. They're probably classed as the rest of Europe asterisks. So, who do you want to be a part of? Who do you want? A country that's going to empower your dictators, but offer you such lucrative markets as Russia and Kyrgyzstan and Belarus? Or do you want to have a prospect of becoming fabulously, insanely wealthy? And I point this out, the West doesn't require you to, to dissuade all power. That's what I want to point out. A lot of the countries that are in the Western sphere of influence still have deeply entrenched power interests that do not lose their influence in the course of elections. Again, if you own a major state, natural resource company, you don't lose your influence and power if you're a major employer, a major tax contributor, and just an individual who holds a lot of wealth. And so that's one of the things that helps persuade these dictator classes away, is that they create a country where the whole pie grows. Even though they're able to extract less of it, they actually maintain massive power and influence. So this is sort of the reason this Russian Eurasian security architecture nonsense is complete and utter bunk, right? But what I want to point out, first off, is that that doesn't mean that Russia isn't potentially on its way. I don't know if I call it a victory, but President Trump has said Ukraine may be Russia someday. But this is sort of annoying. This is CNN being CNN here, okay? Because here's the actual quote. Let's see if we can find it. They, quote, Ukraine may make a deal. They may not make a deal. They may be Russian someday, or they may not be Russian someday, Trump said. He stressed that he wanted to see a return on investment for U.S. aid in Ukraine, again floating idea of a trade for Kiev's rare earth minerals. Right? Now, the Kremlin's official stance, they say a significant part of Ukraine wants to become Russia, and the fact that it already has become Russia is undeniable. This is according to Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov. Now, this is the thing, right? I think what Trump is trying to say is, listen, everything's on the table, and he's trying to ratchet up pressure on both Ukraine and Russia to sit down and make a deal. And one of the things we've pointed out on this channel is that Ukraine has been trying to stage peace talks, peace negotiations, get a deal done since the start is for at least 2 years, right? And it's primarily been Russia who's refused, right? And Russia doesn't feel the need to refuse because, again, some of their economic data shows their country is continuing to grow, at least in nominal terms. The massive government spending is, again, fueling a huge boom in the Russian economy, growing something like 4% this year, according to the official statistics. So Putin needs to be hurting a lot more. And that's the thing. Putin has repeatedly refused to negotiate because he feels his position continually is getting better. And the White House needs to come to that realization. Now, I want to point out one other story here, which I thought was interesting, is that the ceasefire deal. This is something that was actually signed under the Biden administration, but it is somewhat attributed to President Trump due to the fact that it appeared that the incoming Trump White House spurred Hamas to sit there and say, hey, listen, the new administration is going to really back Israel almost 100%. We are going to get the best deal we're going to get because we have the most sympathetic White House. They also, of course, have seen their allies like Iran and Hezbollah basically get sandblasted by the Israelis. And, I think they realize this isn't super winnable. But the ceasefire deal appears to be falling apart, right? And things have gotten pretty unhinged, right? Hamas is saying that it refuses to release the hostages that it agreed to in the deal because Israel has reneged on parts of the ceasefire deal that it signed. And so they both accuse each other of violating the deal. But more troubling is that, again, the White House not really helping this happen because the president has said that he wants to have the U.S. Basically, I mean, this is right. The ethnically cleanse Palestinians from Gaza, remove all Palestinians from Gaza and redevelop it in some kind of like Trump Tower beachside resort, which, of course, you might recall at the start of this war was considered a somewhat edgy meme. And now it appears to be increasingly close to actual policy. And this level of kind of unforced error, just poor diplomacy. All he had to do was shut the fuck up, and this ceasefire would have gone off. And now he appears to have potentially single-handedly, though I'm sure both sides also have some culpability. It appears that they're just taking a big L, right? Trump, the peacemaker, is one of his best electoral traits, right? His willingness to rip off the Band-Aid, right? And as much as I absolutely fucking hate the fact the U.S. lost in Afghanistan, the 21st year of the war was not going to be the year we turned it all around, right? I'm glad we're done wasting money there. We wasted so much money, but we didn't need to waste more. So, I think that why not just take a win, dude? Why not just take a win? I don't understand why you have to be like, well, we're going to make Gaza a beachside fucking resort. I don't know. But there's one other discussion that I think we need to have. And again, because I feel like if I don't cover this, because this is a national security channel, and the country, you might recall, the entire military, including me, actually took an oath to the Constitution of the United States. And while I do not receive any kind of paycheck from the U.S. government, I still believe in the fundamental oath to the Constitution. So when I see things that trouble me about the health of the country and its relationship to its Constitution, I got to say something. And that is this problem here, right? That increasingly Trump and other members of his administration, right, including J.D. Vance, seems to be saying that the Constitution is mostly an obstacle, right? Again, the Constitution, and it makes clear that the Congress funds and creates these agencies. And that means that when Congress says we are allocating money in the budget to fund agency X, then you have to that agency has to exist. That money has to go there, right? That is how the concept of spending works, right? Like, it's like saying, hey, if you give your spouse, you say, here's the grocery money for this week, and she goes and spends it on clothes. You go, listen, no, you didn't spend the money in the way you had to. And the Constitution's very clear. Congress opens up the wallet. Congress doles out the money. He says, here's what you get to spend on groceries, right? The executive branch gets to choose the store. In some cases, they get to choose exactly what the groceries are within certain parameters. But they get to choose the order that they shop, and they get to choose if they, do it in one trip or in 10 trips. They want to shop around. Those are all things, but the Constitution is clear who spends the money. And so the administration has gone and has decided that it's going to take grocery money and spend it on clothes or cars or some other fucking thing, right? Now, I'm not any big fan of USAID. We spent something to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars pumped through USAID into Afghanistan, and it bought us exactly zero loyalty and influence in the Afghan government. As the day the checks stopped clearing, the Afghans dropped us like a sack of potatoes. So I'm happy, I'm not like that upset to see someone taking a look at it, but that doesn't mean you get to shit on the Constitution to do it, right? And now Trump says, if the courts tell me not to do something, I'm just going to ignore it, right? And this is pretty troubling because, again, we talked yesterday. J.D. Vance said the same thing. He goes, the courts, they make suggestions. They make suggestions. But here's the problem. If Congress's spending is just a suggestion and can be ignored, and the court's interpretations of the law can be ignored, then what exactly stops the president from doing any fucking thing he wants? What stops him from being a king? What stops him from saying, you know what, Congress says the military, the court says the military can't arrest U.S. citizens, but, the courts can't tell a military general. This is an actual quote from the VP. He says, the courts can't tell a military general how to stage an operation. So what if you order a general to say, go arrest U.S. citizens? They go, well, he wouldn't do that. Well, says who? It's convenient. It's easy. So why not? And the official stance of the vice president is that the courts can't tell a military general how to do an operation. Right? This is why we end up in these constitutions. This is why people call this a slow walking constitutional crisis, because that's what it is. It's not clear. The people who need to do something, honestly, are the Senate and congressional Republicans. They have to sit there and say, yo, even if you are like, hey, this isn't about Trump, or I support or I don't support what Trump's doing, think for a minute. Imagine Trump, well, he can't run in the next election. Imagine you're a Republican and you lose to someone who has the Trump perspective, but is ideologically different, is a super turbo leftist. And you say, well, this dude can't just do anything he wants, right? President leftist can't just ignore the courts and Congress. He can't just shut down agencies he doesn't like. Let's say he wakes up and goes, I'm going to shut down ICE. We don't need ICE. We don't need to enforce immigration laws. Well, Congress would go, no, you can't do that. You can't. We're going to sue you. You can't. We allocated funding for it. Your own party approved funding for this agency. You can't just shut it down. And the president leftist goes, yeah, I can. Your president did it to a development agency. So why can't I do it to ICE? And so this is why it's called game theory. It's a prisoner's dilemma. Once you establish betrayal as a strategy, there is no incentive. You're just dumb. You're just a bad player at the game if you don't betray in turn. And then what you have, though, the problem is that you end up in this knife fight where it actually ends up really trashing the country, because instead of cooperating to run it and cooperating and agreeing to respect institutions, right? Because in turn, you'll be respected when you're in the minority party. You just have this pure destruction. And this is it. I don't know what else to tell you. If you've ever seen a country whose institutions are ultra politicized and characterized by just vicious infighting and knife fighting. They're bad countries. They're Brazil, right? And Brazil's not a bad country. I love Brazil, but like Brazil is a place where you can go shopping on their Rodeo Drive and you will literally hear the gangs in a gunfight with the cops like a few hundred yards away. These are countries with just tremendously greater political instability, tremendously diminished ability to even solve like basic problems. Again, like we have a slum where there's no cops. How do we do anything about it? And a country with no strong institutions simply doesn't work. Anyway, again, stay informed. Stay informed. Try to use your own brain. Use your own brain to think about the things that are said. Read the Constitution yourselves. If you haven't done it, it's worth it. It's only a couple of pages. It's worth it, right? Because ultimately, there's a lot of people that want to tell you what to think. A lot of news outlets, a lot of things you read online. They want to tell you what to think. I try not to be one of them, but like I'm a human being too. And so you should come to these conclusions yourself. Look at what the actual statements are. Look at what it is actually meant. Look at what actually it says in these things like the Constitution. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Thank you so much. Hit the subscribe button. I'll see you over on Combat Vet News. Thanks to Bill Collier, Robert Colberg, Gars, Martin, Gina Cresta, Chris Gorsuch, Francis Caris, L90, Petchatoru. All of our Lieutenant Tier members could not do it without you guys. Appreciate you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.